He talks a good game. He talks a good game. On the outside, he talks a good game.
Hello, welcome to On the Ed Son. I hope you're all well. So I'm back again. I was only online about 5 minutes ago. I'm back again, but this time it's a quick live show. Actually, a lot shorter than the one before, talking about football and West Ham, of course, a relegation battle. But this one is all about. Hey, we've had the fallout into the boxing world of Simon Jordan and Deyontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder's fighting War Chisora, Derek Chisora, on the 4th of April. The O2 Arena, coming over here. Two senior statesmen of the boxing world, and many have been questioning, well, why don't they just hang it up? Why, retire? I can't remember how old Dalboy is. He's getting on in years, isn't he? Can't remember what his age is, but Deontay Wilder is 40 years old. So Deontay Wilder had a win last time out, but the previous two fights he had against Zhilei Zhang and also Joseph Parker, he lost and he looked really, really poor. War Chisora, Derek Chisora, I've got to say, every time you think he's out, he comes on and he puts on a great performance and he puts on a great show. So this is when we talk about, not necessarily the quality of fighters in terms of whether they're still at the top level, but if you match them up correctly, they can bring on really entertaining and engaging fights. And Derek Chisora has done that. And each time he's basically been saying, this is my last fight. And he come out and he said, no, I want to get to 50. And each time he's been able to win these fights. The last 2 or 3 fights, he's won these fights. I think the fight before, it was a really disappointing draw. But he, always a very narrow points win. I really can't remember. But he's got to the point and said, well, I got to the 50th fight. I've got this big name, Deontay Wilder, O2 Arena. Yeah, and it's going to be an entertaining fight, right? I think so. So they go on to the Simon Jordan podcast. So there's been quite a lot of backlash over this. And I'm sure you've seen it by now. What happened, and it's descended into a full-blown row. Deontay Wilder storming off, bringing in race into it, and all sorts of things like that. But let's just address something else before then. I've watched the whole podcast, and this is typical Simon Jordan approach to speaking to somebody, right? And I've had a long-standing issue with Simon Jordan in terms of the way he spoke about people doing YouTube and, they're just YouTubers, all this sort of stuff. He, really looks down his nose on them. But actually, a lot of his content is all on YouTube, right? So the last couple of years, he's starting to soften a little bit on YouTubers. But it's only YouTube that comes from TalkSport that is okay. Other YouTubers is not okay. And he doesn't like that. He's a bit of a... He is a twat, really, when it comes to this kind of thing. While sometimes he has a point, and he does make good points from time to time, most of the time he alienates a lot of people. But also it's his manner and the way he speaks to people. It's disgraceful. And he keeps saying, I'm not a journalist. And so, well, I'm not sure who the fuck you think you are a lot of the time. You make yourself out to be all-knowing and everything, always have an opinion. I mean, not many people value your opinion. But he's contrary, isn't he? He's contradictory. He brings views, and when he labels, YouTubers for just doing this stuff for clickbait and everything like that, well, he's the biggest clickbaiter out there. The whole show is. A lot of TalkSport is. They've learned on the back of YouTubers about attention grabbing. They do it all the time. They're putting out all their YouTube channels, always the same sort of stuff. So all the things that they criticize YouTubers for, sporting YouTubers about, they do, or they've learnt to do themselves. But because they've got the might of a media corporation behind them, they think they're all knowing. Since when, I say, Simon Jordan has become this expert pundit or this expert broadcaster, which he isn't. And the way he talks to people is really disrespectful, I think. And I'm surprised nobody's putting it on him, already. That, or somebody's just met him in a dark alley one day and had a right go at him. I'm not saying that anybody should, for all that matter. What I'm saying is, I'm just surprised that nobody's had a go at him and doing this kind of stuff. But look, he's there. He's he's created a situation where he's got Deontay Wilder onto his podcast, Derek Chisora. They're supposed to be talking about the fight. Deontay Wilder apparently beforehand has said he doesn't want to talk about certain issues. He doesn't want to talk about Tyson Fury, right? But then Simon Jordan starts with his podcast, and the way he's talking, I've seen it all the way to the build-up until when it really kicked off. It's just his standard things that he's talking about, and he's trying to poke the bear, and he's just being disrespectful. The way he's snarling, and the way he's talking, and the way he's even talking about Derek Chisora. I kind of think, you really need to learn some manners. You really need to learn some respect about, for other people. And I'm not just saying because they're boxers, but you can speak to anybody with a certain amount of respect, certain amount of decorum, with a certain amount of, politeness. And there isn't much of that. So this is why, I don't believe that, certainly from, football fans' point of view, even a boxing fan's point of view, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find many people who really enjoy, I don't know, maybe they do. Maybe people do enjoy his commentary or his opinions or the way he acts or the way talk about things. I don't. And certainly as a West Ham fan, I certainly don't. As a football fan in general, I think they got warped views a lot of the time. Not all the time. I'm not talking about, I'm talking in general. Not all the time, but a lot of the time they do. But at least, White and Jordan show, they are both, polarizing people. They polarize people. Their opinions polarize people. But they're there, especially Simon Jordan. It seems as if he was brought in, because he was an ex-football owner of Crystal Palace and everything like that, to add a bit of insight. Well, he's got carried away with that. He started to believe his own hype. And he keeps on saying, I'm not a journalist, I'm just here to do this type of thing. Well, actually, no, you are. You're a broadcaster. You're not a journalist, you're a broadcaster. And nobody's taught you that you can't speak to people in that way. But, by all accounts, I was watching a podcast by, never seen her before, actually. So, I've never come across her before, Melissa Zard. So, good props to her. It was a nice little chat. She was having a chat with Robbie Lyle's brother, Laurie Lyle, who's more of a boxing fan, right, and everything. But they were reflecting on it. I thought, yeah, some of the things that they were saying was absolutely right. But in terms of the way you should be interviewing people, the way you should be speaking to people, so the way he was speaking to Deontay Wilder and Derek Chisora, and the way he kind of rules the roost in his way, I just think, who the fuck do you think you are? Who do you think you are talking to people like that? This is my show. And you think, well, hold on a minute, just watch yourself, right? But, he keeps on doing it, and he keeps on doing it. Apparently, according to Laurie Lowe, he was saying that he believes, or he's been led to believe, that people within Talk Sport don't even like him. Behind the scenes, they don't even like him very much. Well, that doesn't surprise me. If you've got that kind of personality, you've got that person that believes that they're even more important than anybody else. I know Simon Jordan's, put out a couple of videos, or not him, but the Talksport put out a couple of videos. He's gone on and talked about his reflections of it and what he thinks he could have done or not done and everything like that. The fact of the matter is that he's created that scenario. Deontay Wilder went on there and he didn't want to talk about Tyson Fury. Now, this happens quite a lot, where the journalists or whatever, because the thing is, people say, well, he's a journalist, he's got to talk, but he keeps on saying, I'm not a journalist. So what is he? He's a broadcaster, right? So, okay, are you going to allow somebody to just not divulge that information because I'm a journalist? Well, say, you can ask your questions, let's say, but also, don't be surprised if somebody reacts that way and say, look, I've told you, we're not going to talk about it. And he did try and tell him, Deontay Wilder did try and tell him, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about it. Because they've obviously had a bit of a to and fro beforehand and said, look, I don't want to talk about it. I'm not going to talk about it. So they didn't talk about it. Well, they weren't going to talk about it. But because I got the feeling that Deontay Wilder and Derek Chisora was kind of getting a bit annoyed with him, the way he was asking his questions. Even before then, he was interrupting them. He's having his little comments. He was making reference to Donald Trump virtually within the first 3 minutes of the video, and then sort of having a go at Derek Chisora because he's for purportedly supporting Reform Party. What's that got to do with the football? The boxing match at hand. What they're there to promote? Again, it was totally misplaced. Even the camera was swinging to Derek Chisora, and Derek Chisora's going, "What the fuck are you talking about? What are you saying this for?" You kind of feel, that's what they were thinking. And there's, Spencer Oliver right at the end. He's going, okay, let's try and get this back on track and everything like that. And it's just like it was a car crash of a podcast, and it was solely because Simon Jordan approached it in a way that he thought, I can do this in my way. And they're just going to answer all my questions because I'm Simon Jordan. Nobody respects you. Nobody cares. Just because you're in talk sport, nobody cares. If you're going to speak to people like that, nobody cares. They're only going to respect you if you speak to them in a proper way, in a respectful way. And you went against exactly what was said before, that you didn't want to speak about that. Now, you could talk about it in a better way. You could have asked about things in a better way, and you could have asked and said, well, how would you compare this this kind of performance against, let's say, performances 5 or 6 years ago? You could have framed it in a different way that, boxing people, especially fans, would know that you were talking about Tyson Fury. Or you could say, do you believe that there are certain things within the boxing world or the boxing environment that has changed over the last 5 or 6 years, that that makes it in a better position now for you to be at a box, all that kind of stuff. You could have reframed it, but no, you could have done it in a much more respectful way and a much more engaging way that would have got Deontay Wilder on your side. Now, so he's got to the point where he's talking about Tyson Fury, then all of a sudden the conversation just flipped. Deontay Wilder flipped it into a talking about race, and basically it flipped that way because you can see exactly why it would flip that way. Because Deontay Wilder was saying, like, you're speaking about these things and you're saying these things, and you say, coming from my point of view, I'm always having to say these things where people will not believe in me, where you're coming from a background of race, and you say, you don't come from the same background as I do, you don't see things the way I see it, and you keep on doing it, and you're doing the same thing, and you're going from white privilege. You can see why it escalated very, very quickly, because Simon Jordan was being the antagonist and being a terrible, terrible broadcaster and terrible interviewer. And hopefully TalkSport would take a long, hard look at this and take a long, hard look at what he's done and say, do you know what? We got this wrong. Do you know what? We should have done something. You've got to do something. You've got to wind this back a bit. Or a lot, because you can't speak to people like that. And the reason why he stormed off and got into a whole race thing and got really angry, and he wasn't as articulate, and he wasn't articulate at all, Deontay Wilder, in trying to get his point across, because he's really upset. He's really emotional at that time. A broadcaster, an interviewer, their point, their main modus operandi, the main reason for being, is to not make it about them. Simon Jordan is always trying to make it about him, about his opinion, about snarling here and there, right? That's what a broadcaster does. Somebody needs to take him aside and say, this is what a broadcaster does. This is what an interviewer does. This is what a journalist does, right? It's not about them. It's about the person. It's about extracting information from them. It's about telling their story. And their reason for being there, Deontay Wilder Chisora, is to talk about their boxing match, the reason why they're having a fight. Everything else is not the story. The story's there. That's the whole point of it. It's a promotional interview. That's what it is. So he totally missed it. He completely screwed this up. The reason why that descended into chaos is because of Simon Jordan. It's not Deontay Wilder's fault. Now, this is not defending Deontay Wilder in terms of immediately flipping it to talking about race and everything like that and really losing his head. in terms, and almost getting very physical. But it could have easily gone to very physical if Simon Jordan just got himself into a situation that he couldn't back out of. But you can understand why it is. But at the same time, Deontay Wilder could have taken the decision not to make it about race. But it's quite easy to talk about that when you're coming from his background and talk about, it doesn't matter what Simon Jordan's intentions were to not make this about race, because I don't think his intention was. But you can see how Deontay Wilder has made it about race, because he's had a whole history of talking about people, people trying to make him talk about things, or say what he said is wrong, or talk about things in a race way. And it's caused the big problem. It's caused the big ruckus. But this is less about Deontay Wilder's reaction, which you could argue he shouldn't have reacted in that way. He should have been able to hold. Derek Chisora was able to hold himself as well, and he was trying to make a bit of lighter on it as well, and make light of it as well. But he was also trying to hold up Simon Jordan to it and say, look, you shouldn't be saying this. You've caused this and all this sort of stuff, right? Derek Chisora has his own issues, has his own problems. He stirs the pot quite a lot as well. It didn't, and Spence Oliver is trying to bring it back onto, let's talk about boxing. Let's just talk about boxing. Because he's right. Politics shouldn't be involved in this sport of boxing. Race shouldn't be in this involved in it. But it is there. It is there. But the reason why it entered the conversation, or entered the argument, or entered the disruption is because Simon Jordan was poking the bear, and he started off initially within the first 2 minutes talking about politics and Trump, and Deontay Wilder said, "Well, no, I don't really want to talk about politics, and then he's poking the bear with Derek Chisora. I'm surprised Derek didn't have a go at him. In all fairness, right? Then he's talking about other things as well, about Tyson Fury and the things that he said and done. And Deontay Wilder is trying to be respectful, and he's trying to say, look, I don't want to talk about that. No, yes, facts, that said, I didn't, but I don't want to talk about this. And he's constantly being bombarded by it. I'm surprised it didn't get into physical confrontation. For me, Deontay Wilder lost his head, 100%. And yes, on another day, you don't have to talk about race in this context. But actually, on this day, it was relevant. It was relevant because you've got somebody there who's been totally disrespectful to you and not understanding your boundaries. And, Deontay Wilder was saying, this is a constant reminder of you, the people like you, believing that you are right and we are wrong. You can see why this happens. This is not some wokeist opinion here. You can just look at the video and you can see the timeline, or the podcast, and you see the timeline. You can see how it's starting to build up. You can see it starting to build in, and the tension growing and growing. You could see it on Derek and Deontay Wilder's face. You could see it. Spencer Oliver was getting uncomfortable with it as well. And Simon Jordan completely lost it. He completely lost what he was supposed to be doing. We got a comment. Hello, thank you for joining here. Let's here we go. What we got here? There we go. Simon Inglishadi. Hello there. How are you? Simon Jordan believes he's better than people. I find his punditry, especially when he speaks, disgusting. I could not agree more. A lot of the time, the things that he says, I just think you're an arsehole. You're a complete arsehole. You're saying things easy. And just, personally, if somebody's spoken to me like that, in that manner, I would be fronting them up straight away. So, who do you think you're talking to? Who do you think you're talking to? What is this, a game? You don't talk to people like that. Regardless who you think you are, how much money you've got, how much, whatever it is. Let's not forget that you're on here to be reactionary, but at the same time, people can, talk back at you. And, I say another day, I'm surprised. Do you know what? I'm surprised Del Boy didn't have a go at him as well. I'm really surprised, in a kind of, when he was having to go with Deontay Wilder, I'm surprised Derek Chisora didn't actually get, okay, no, you could argue it's not his place to get involved in their little conversation, but it's almost to just say, Derek just should have said, Simon, shut the fuck up. You're talking a load of bollocks here. And also somebody tell him there, watch your manners. Don't be disrespectful. You're being totally disrespectful. And somebody should have said it. I'm hoping that behind the scenes, Talk Sports, somebody is saying that to him. The powers that be. Because this has been going on for way too long for his kind of rhetoric, for his kind of opinion, for his kind of demeanour to be allowed to continue. Yeah, I'm not saying that he's always wrong. I'm not saying that sometimes he doesn't have a point or he doesn't bring something to the table. And yes, you can have a bit of tongue-in-cheek with people. But, you're dealing with a complete stranger in Deontay Wilder. So you've got to make sure that you know who you're speaking to. But he always does this. He always says things and he shouldn't be saying them. But the fallout from this is a lot big because a lot of people are going to be looking at the likes of Deontay Wilder and say, like Tyson Fury, say, oh, well, he's got a mental illness and, he shouldn't have said this. Lots of people in the comments will say, oh, why do you bring about race? It's got nothing to do with race. It's got nothing to do with it. But if you look at the podcast, if you look at the video, you can see the reason why it ended up like that is because of the build-up and because of the manner in which everything was happening, the manner in which Simon Jordan was talking. And there's cause and effect here. There's definitely cause and effect. And he was basically saying, well, he's allowed to speak about Tyson Fury, to Rick Reno and other people. Why can't he? He should be answering my questions. He should be answering, who the hell do you think you are thinking that he has to answer your questions? Nobody has to answer your questions. You're not a judge. You're not the police. Nobody has to answer you. Have to answer anything. You can ask your questions and they can decline, and you should respect that. But if you don't respect that, you don't respect anyone else's opinion about yourself. That makes you 100% the narcissist that you are. Find me a football fan that likes Simon Jordan, and I'd say, well, that surprises me. Find me a boxing fan that really likes Simon Jordan's opinion. I'd be like, and he always tries to back it away. So, I've never got in the ring, but I have an opinion and all this kind of stuff. I said, well, fine, you have an opinion. Every man and his dog's got an opinion, right? I'm a boxing fan. Yeah, I love boxing. I love talking about boxing. But at the same time, I'm respectful of somebody who's trying to get in the ring and do a job. You say, look, you can talk about performances, you can talk about levels, you can talk about on the day. But when you start talking about chipping away in somebody, who's, you got to stay on task with these things. And obviously his personality, whilst it's reactionary, whilst it is inflammatory, it might be good for the clickbait stuff, which he hates to admit that he's part of. He actually is. He is part of it. And and this is a reason why they probably still have him around. But at the same time, here we go. In the shadow, I haven't seen the interview, but I will watch. His opinion, Jordan is belittling people of his D-back. I'm out the front. Yeah, cheers, pal. I think he is. I think he's, but there we go. It is what it is. Look, but the thing is, he repeats it. It's a pattern of behaviour. It's a pattern of speaking to people. He does it time and time again. I'm not surprised this happened. I'm not surprised this went on. I'm not surprised that Deontay Wilder. Well, I'm a little surprised that Deontay Wilder let it get to him. That's the thing. I would have been less surprised if I'd heard afterwards that there was a scuffle afterwards and Deontay Wilder and Simon Jordan had a set to off air, off the camera, right? I would have, all right at the very end of the podcast, Deontay Wilder said, you're an arsehole. The way you're speaking to people is a disgrace. Blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't have been surprised. I was a little surprised that it manifested its way, and I was a little surprised that it went down the race route as quickly as it did. But you've got to understand what somebody is saying in reaction to what you're saying. And then you can't suddenly say to somebody, oh, you can't play the race card. Well, they can. They can play the race card in inverted commas if you're acting in a way that is belittling to them and they can't get their opinion out. And you're totally disrespecting their opinion beforehand. Do you know what I mean? It kind of happens. Anyway, listen. We could go on and on and about this. You know, if we get back to the boxing, which Spencer Oliver was trying to do in the podcast, so let's talk about the boxing. And we never really got a good indication of why these two, you know, there is a question about age, there is a question about performance, there is a question of these two, should they really still be boxing? Deontay Wilder still thinks he's got it and still wants to fight. Derek Chisora is saying, you know, 50-0 or 50 fights now, this would be the end of it. I think Simon Jordan was saying afterwards, you know what, if you win, you might want to think. And then Derek Chisora was saying, no, you don't understand. And I don't know. Who knows what will happen afterwards. It would be great if it was 50-0 and Derek said, right, that's it. Deontay Wilder, who knows? Until he gets in with, you know, the big one, you know, the big ones again, you know, then he'll know whether he's at it. And obviously they're going to be trying to do it for money, and they're going to try, and you know, you could take this until somebody's 50, 60 years old, and you say, yeah, if there's a market out there, people want to watch him fight and he's got some skills, then yeah. But obviously most people would say in their right mind 35, 40, anything more than that, really, you kind of, it's, you know, for heavyweights, that is, you kind of got to be looking at it. And we all saw, you know, and aging fighters getting into the ring, it's just not good, because you can't do it. You just can't do it. So you have to come down the levels. I'm not saying that you can't have entertaining fights at lower levels, but at higher levels, you're just not going to be there, right? You're just not going to be able to do it. So all you can do is match yourself up with like fighters, right? If you try and match them up with younger fighters, faster fighters, more powerful punching fighters, they're not, so it's all about matchmaking here. This is all about matchmaking. But at the end of the day, I'm definitely going to watch it. I'm definitely going to be intrigued. But it's the same old thing about Deontay Wilder. He's only got the right hand, and you know he looks languid at times, and his style and his acumen isn't there. Ring IQ isn't there a lot of the time. But as is said in the podcast, you know, Derek's going to stand in front of him and he's just going to be throwing bombs, and he's going to be trying to throw those overhand rights, which he keeps on trying to do, right? And he's going to bomb in there. And what Derek Chisora is going to do, he's going to try and take that punishment, as much punishment as he can, and try and land. And that's it. It's who's going to be able to withstand the bombs, basically. Who's going to be able to withstand the bombs? Can't wait. This is the 4th of April. Can't wait for it. If you like what I do here, keep on watching. Simon Jordan got taught a lesson there, and he probably needs to be taught a few more lessons verbally, especially from the powers that be and the corridors of power of Talk Sport, I would imagine. But we'll have to see what happens. Okay, if you like what I do here, keep on watching. If you like the live shows, keep on watching, and I'll catch you again. Another video coming very soon. Live show very soon. Whatever that is, who knows? Right, got to stop this live chat now. Ta-da. Bye now.